When they moved to Vermont, Christine and Charlie Billis thought they'd gotten away from it all.
They had rented an old farmhouse.
It's away from the city and all the noise.
But one small slip on a quiet country road would shatter everything.
The car hit the tree at high speed.
Christine survived.
She basically walked away from the accident.
But Charlie didn't.
He was not wearing a seatbelt.
It's just like, well, your dad didn't make it.
The investigation immediately raised questions.
Why did this car just veer off the road and slam head-on into a tree?
Was it just a tragic accident?
She was on a lot of medication.
They think she may have had a seizure.
Or did their idyllic country life conceal something darker?
She'd killed my best friend.
She just snapped.
I just couldn't take it anymore.
Brownington, Vermont, September 22nd, 2009. It was a crisp fall day in Vermont's Northeast Kingdom, the picturesque region of forest-covered mountains and white-clapboard farmhouses just south of the Canadian border.
Probably the most beautiful part of the state. It's your postcard picture.
The colors would have been alive with the foliage changing.
But at around 4:15 that Tuesday afternoon, for one farm family outside the tiny village of 900, the peace and quiet of the countryside was about to be brutally interrupted.
The people who lived in the home said it was a loud crash, just this big boom.
And when the frightened family rushed outside, they found the source of the crash. A car had smashed into the huge oak tree in their front yard.
The car hit the tree with great force at high speed.
The car was heavily damaged.
The family called 911 and then managed to free the driver of the car, 42-year-old Christine Billis.
They're able to get her out easily because her side of the car is not as heavily damaged as the passenger side.
And while Christine appeared shaken by the crash, she had been extremely lucky.
Christine wasn't injured at all. She basically walked away from the accident.
But Christine's husband, 57-year-old Charlie Billis, was trapped inside the wreckage until emergency crews arrived on the scene.
Rescue crews had to use, the jaws of life to get Charlie out of the vehicle.
And even when they did get him out, the prognosis wasn't good.
And they weren't sure if he was going to make it.
Charles didn't have a seatbelt on.
He struck the windshield, the dashboard, the roof of the vehicle.
The cause of Charlie's injuries may have been obvious, but as the ambulance rushed him to the hospital, the emergency workers at the scene were left with a puzzle. What had caused the crash?
There were no skin marks. It shows that there was no intent to stop.
The weather conditions were clear.
But whatever else might have caused Christine to veer off the road was far less clear. And when it finally came out, Christine would find the truth about the crash far harder to walk away from. Born in 1967, Christine Skorker had grown up in Massachusetts, where her family could trace its roots to a local Native American tribe.
The tribe that my mom and I are from are Micmac.
She grew up in the Boston suburbs, part of a hardworking, blue-collar family.
They were very church-going people. They're Baptists, and that was a big part of their life.
Christine never went to college. Instead, she got married and had a daughter at 19 and another before turning 30.
I was actually born right in Boston.
Her marriage ended in divorce soon after, leaving the 30-year-old a single mom, struggling to raise a 2-year-old and a 10-year-old.
Christine never worked more than part-time here or there.
Entry-level jobs, McDonald's, things like that. But she always made sure that she provided for us.
Even if it meant she had to go without.
She would literally starve herself to make sure that her children ate that day.
And she always had faith that things would work out, which turned out to be true, more or less. It was Christine's faith that led her to Charlie Billis in 1998. 15 years older than Christine, Charlie had spent most of his life in Massachusetts.
We grew up in the Boston area.
But unlike Christine, his roots weren't Native American.
Charles was originally from Greece.
And he'd come to America in search of a miracle.
Charles was blind as a child, and his parents took him from Greece to the United States to have an operation that would enable him to regain his sight.
The operation was a limited success.
He was technically legally blind, so he could see, but not like very well.
But he more than made up for his disability in other ways.
Charlie was a real character. He was real smart.
And despite the fact that he was legally blind, Charlie even managed to make a modest living as a car salesman.
It was something he was really good at, talking people into things.
He was also very religious, which is how he first met Christine in 1998.
They met through the church, which is super cute to me.
And once Charlie met Christine, the smooth-talking car salesman quickly convinced the 31-year-old to go out on a date.
He was just a gentleman and a sweetheart, and she saw that.
One date led to another and another, and within a year, they were married.
My mom loved him.
So did her daughters.
I consider him my dad. I mean, he's raised me since I was a little girl.
He took interest in everything they did. I mean, he was a great guy with the kids.
Soon after the marriage, Christine, Charlie, and her 2 daughters moved to northern Vermont.
They had rented an old farmhouse.
It was outside the tiny village of Brownington,
We lived like 20 miles from the nearest anything.
and that suited Charlie just fine.
My dad just fell in love with Vermont because it's so beautiful up here. It's quiet and it's away from the city and all the noise.
For the first few years, Charlie continued to work.
At a dealership in Orleans.
But while his modest salary continued to support the family, living in the country meant he relied on Christine's support more than ever.
Christine had to drive him everywhere. Without her, he wouldn't be able to get around.
Still, Christine appeared equally happy about the move. And within a year of their arrival in Vermont, she gave birth to a daughter, Charlie's first and her third.
She was a terrific mom. She really doted on her kids, never failed to give them a lot of hugs and tell them that she loved them.
She was just a great person. She was happy all the time. She was really involved with the people around her. She had friends. She's an active member of the church.
Changes were coming, though. By 2005, Christine's oldest daughter had grown up and moved out on her own. And Charlie left his part-time job as a car salesman.
The family relied on Charlie's disability check to survive.
Charlie wasn't one to sit around idle, though.
He wanted to remain active in the community.
So he started volunteering at NEK TV.
NEK TV is the local public education and government access channel.
In fact, Charlie didn't just volunteer. He was soon hosting his own offbeat show.
I'm your co-host, I guess, Charlie Billis.
He had a wicked sense of humor. He had a show called Public Forum, and he would interview people.
He loved being able to talk to people in the community about the issues.
And people loved talking to Charlie, too.
He was a great person to have a conversation with.
Never any notes. Everything was off the top of his head. He had an incredible memory. He was very sharp.
The show was a hit.
And it was pretty exciting.
For Charlie and Christine.
She'd put a lot of work into the productions and did the camera work and the editing and that stuff.
It really gave them something to focus on.
However, since it was strictly volunteer work, it didn't give them much to live on.
They were very poor. They were living on, a fixed income.
They'd never been well off, but with Charlie no longer selling cars, things were tighter than ever before.
The family was strapped for cash.
And by 2007, the family faced other challenges too. Although she'd only just turned 40, Christine was in poor health.
She was diabetic.
Worse, in the spring of 2009, she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer.
She had a total hysterectomy.
The operation was a success, and the cancer scare convinced Christine to make another positive change in her health, too.
She's trying to quit smoking. It was something that she had always really wanted to do, and she knew that it was a bad habit, and she wanted to be a good role model to us.
And this time, she had help.
She was prescribed the medication Chantix to help, quit
as a result, by the afternoon of September 22nd, 2009, when she drove Charlie into the studio to tape the latest episode of his show, it seemed that things were once again looking up for Christine.
I could hear her laughing behind the camera.
And then, once the taping was done, Christine and Charlie got into her car and headed off into the late September afternoon.
Late September, the leaves are changing colors, especially in the northern part of the state. It's beautiful.
On this beautiful autumn day, they headed home towards Brownington.
But as Christine drove home on that gorgeous Vermont afternoon, her life with Charlie was about to come to a sudden, devastating end. On the afternoon of September 22nd, 2009, state troopers and local EMTs rushed to the scene of an accident outside the tiny Vermont village of Brownington.
There's this car that just slammed into a tree.
The driver of the car was 42-year-old Christine Billis.
She had some minor, certainly non-life-threatening injuries.
Although she did appear badly shaken by the impact.
She's convulsing. EMTs think she's going into shock.
Meanwhile, her husband, 57-year-old Charles Billis, was in far worse shape.
Charles was not wearing a seatbelt.
He is seriously injured.
Charles and Christine were both transported to North Country Hospital in Newport.
Not long after, the highway patrol notified Christine's teenage daughter, Karina, who had just gotten home from school.
The police showed up. The cop just comes in and was like, oh, your parents went off-road, which is, like, not a big deal. You think maybe they drove into a ditch or a tire popped or something.
But the highway patrolman hadn't finished.
And he's just like, well, your dad didn't make it.
Charles basically bled out at the scene.
And by the time he reached the ER, there was nothing the doctors could do.
The doctors try everything, but shortly after arrival, they pronounce him dead.
Charlie's stepdaughter was stunned by the news.
I'm like, how do I process this? You know, I'm like really confused.
But she did rush to the hospital to be with her mother, who was being kept under observation.
She just reached out her arms and was crying on my shoulder, and I'm still really confused.
So was her mother, who appeared more than a little disoriented after the ordeal.
The EMTs thought maybe she had a seizure leading up to the crash.
It would certainly explain her uncontrollable shaking and convulsions after the crash. But what about the crash itself?
Why did this car just veer off the road and slam head-on into a tree?
While Christine was in the ER, accident investigators from the Highway Patrol tried to determine what had caused the crash. And what they found appeared to defy explanation.
There were no skid marks.
The weather was fine.
It was dry, it was sunny.
And it wasn't a particularly dangerous stretch of road either.
It's a pretty straight road in that area. There's like one tree right there on the side of the road.
In fact, Christine and Charlie had passed that way hundreds of times before.
It's a route they drove every day. It's not like this road was unfamiliar to them.
Given all that, the investigators at the scene had a hard time understanding just how Christine could have hit the tree, unless she'd been trying.
The police had suspicions about whether it had been an intentional crash.
However, by the time Charlie was buried a week later, most of the people who weren't privy to the details of the crash still assumed he died in a tragic car accident.
I attended the funeral. Folks were very sad. Our hearts went out to Christine and to his family.
But not everyone's hearts went out to Christine. Among her fellow volunteers at the TV station, the speculation was rampant.
Co-workers started going to the police saying, you know, you might really want to take a closer look. Was this an accident, or was this Christine killing Charlie on purpose?
According to their fellow volunteers, Christine and Charlie had been bickering lately.
They knew the Billises were having some marital problems.
They have had their moments where, you know, they're both yelling.
Charlie had accused her of being lazy and whatnot.
Not that their arguing had appeared to be anything serious.
I just, shrugged it off. I thought it was just Charlie, complaining.
It was just because she was quitting smoking. That's what happens to people. They get grumpy and cranky.
But there was something else. An incident Charlie's friend Steve Merrill had been stewing over since the accident. According to what Steve told the state police, the incident had occurred about a month before the crash that killed Charlie.
Me and Chrissy were talking out back during a cigarette break.
And one of the things they talked about was a story that Steve hadn't thought much about at the time.
He had told her how his friend had committed insurance fraud.
But what was really interesting was how Steve's friend had pulled it off.
By crashing his car on purpose.
The car was a lemon. It was always in the garage, and the only way to get rid of it, in their eyes, was to total it.
And according to Steve, the details of the story, details he'd shared with Christine, sounded awfully familiar.
The driver had belted himself in, put on a full-face motorcycle helmet and a pillow, and driven it into a tree.
Was it possible that Steve's story had planted the seed of a murder plot? Charlie's friend was convinced.
She killed him. She did it intentionally.
But when Steve took his story to the state police, they were skeptical.
I'm gonna take my car and this is the perfect way to murder my husband without hurting myself. That makes no sense to me.
And they were hesitant to open a murder investigation based on a single conversation during a smoke break.
There was absolutely no evidence to substantiate suspicions that this crash was intentional.
Besides, there appeared to be a far more logical explanation for the crash. In June, only 3 months before the accident, Christine had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer and undergone a hysterectomy.
She was on a lot of medication.
Not only that, Christine's health problems had taken quite a toll on her emotions.
She was seeing a mental health counselor.
Christine was taking 2 different antidepressants.
The cancer scare had also caused her to try and quit smoking, leading her to take a drug called Chantix.
People take Chantix to quit smoking. There are other effects of it, but for the most part, it's to quit smoking.
And one of those other effects led to the final drug that Christine had started taking in the weeks leading up to the crash.
Chantix caused insomnia and some other things, which caused her to take the Ambien.
Ambien, Chantix, and the antidepressants. When combined, the drugs apparently produced some disturbing results.
Just made her kind of a different person. She used to be really bubbly. She would cook a lot. She's a great chef, would make the best soups, and after starting all these medicines they prescribed her, she just kind of fell out of it. She didn't really have interest in things anymore.
But did they do more than that? The day before the crash, Christine had gone to her doctor complaining about fatigue and drowsiness.
She was talking about having near accidents.
In fact, Christine claimed she'd been experiencing blackouts.
They was talking about actually driving and not actually remembering the path that she drove.
And as far as the state troopers conducting the investigation were concerned, that explained the crash.
The conclusions in the reports were that it was some kind of medical condition.
They think she may have had a seizure
that caused her to veer off the road and hit the tree.
In other words, case closed.
The coroner said it was an accident, and so did the accident report.
But in the months ahead, investigators would have reason to question that ruling. By January 2011, it had been more than a year since 43-year-old Christine Billis had smashed her car head-on into a tree outside rural Brownington, Vermont.
Police were a little suspicious about the crash. Why did this car go off the road?
Christine had suffered only minor injuries, but her husband, 57-year-old Charlie Billis, had been killed in the crash.
While she had her seatbelt on, Charlie did not. And of course, he went into the windshield and died shortly after the crash.
Officially, the crash had been ruled an accident.
Everyone assumed that Christine either fell asleep or had a seizure or something.
The day before the accident, Christine was actually at a sleep study doctor's appointment.
However, around NEK-TV, the public access station where Charlie and Christine had both volunteered, rumors persisted.
Well, she'd killed my best friend. I knew that she did it.
Despite hard feelings on the part of her fellow volunteers, Christine did her best to carry on as before.
After Charlie had been killed, she would show up at the studio and do some productions on her own.
And more than a year after her husband's death, the 43-year-old also had a new man in her life, Kevin Leland. Like Charlie, Kevin worked on the fringes of the media world.
He's a blogger. He loved blogging about crime stories online.
And he'd met Christine online, too, in August of 2010.
Christine and Kevin Leland met on a dating site called OkCupid.
Christine had a, really good sense of humor and was easy to talk to, especially online.
One of the first things Christine shared after meeting Kevin was the fact that she'd lost her husband almost a year earlier.
Christine told me that Charles died in a car accident.
An accident that she blamed on herself.
Christine said that she must have had a spell. She's a diabetic, and when she passed out behind the wheel, the car veered off and hit the tree.
And according to Kevin, she was still struggling to deal with the aftermath.
She was depressed.
She seemed devastated over the loss of her husband, said that he was a good guy.
But without Charlie in her life, Christine was lonely, which is what had brought her to OkCupid and Kevin.
They became friends, they talked on the phone.
And eventually, they met in person.
We shared a lot of laughs and got to know each other pretty quickly, I think.
However, according to Kevin, he and Christine had shared more than just laughs.
Reading her profile, OkCupid asks you about, what secret would you be willing to reveal online? And she says, well, nothing now, but once I get to know you, I'll tell you a little something, something.
And when she finally did trust Kevin enough to reveal her secret, Christine's little something would turn out to be huge. On January 14th, 2011, Kevin Leland made a phone call to Vincent Iluzzi, an NEK-TV volunteer, Vermont state senator, and county prosecutor.
In state politics, you receive all kinds of calls from all kinds of people. Some are legitimate, some are crackpots, and some are somewhere in between.
And when Kevin told Iluzzi why he was calling, the state senator figured he was just one more crackpot.
I told him that I had information regarding the murder of his friend, Charles Billis.
My initial reaction was highly skeptical, somewhat dismissive, because it came from someone I had never met, never spoken with, did not know.
Kevin asked Iluzzi to hear him out, though, explaining how he'd met Christine through the dating website.
She obviously fell for him. She trusted him.
So much so that over the last few months, she had opened up to him.
She indicated that she wasn't as happily married as she led me to believe she was at first.
And that admission, according to Kevin, had eventually led Christine to reveal the secret she'd hinted at in her online profile.
She just broke down sobbing, just said that I did it on purpose. I drove the car into the tree on purpose.
Not only had Christine supposedly confessed, Kevin claimed she'd told him why she'd done it.
She told me that he was abusive to both her and her daughters.
Kevin said that Christine had even taken him out to the crash site and walked him through the so-called accident.
She was talking about it almost with a sense of pride, like, look what I did.
It was an incredible story, if it was true.
I said, Mr. Leland, I'm a prosecutor, and in the criminal justice system, you need proof.
Proof that Kevin Leland claimed to have.
His response was, I have tape recordings.
I recorded her confessing.
I immediately told him to secure the tapes in a safe location, and I would have someone from the Vermont State Police get in touch with him.
On January 21st, Kevin Leland met with an investigator from the Vermont State Police and played the tape he'd made of Christine's supposed confession.
He didn't seem shocked at all, and he indicated to me that they actually did have some suspicion, but nothing that they could act on.
But Kevin's tape changed all that.
That's enough evidence for them then to go get a warrant.
It wasn't an arrest warrant, though. Instead, it authorized the investigators to use Kevin as a confidential informant to record more conversations with Christine.
That first recording wasn't usable. It wasn't admissible because I didn't get it under a warrant.
And on February 13th, 2011, Kevin met with Christine and secretly recorded their conversation.
In this particular case, the state police relied on Mr. Leland to use his own digital recorder.
I kept it in my pocket.
It was crude, but it worked. On the tape, Christine once again admitted to crashing the car on purpose.
I was protecting myself and my kids. That's what I was doing.
She claimed Charlie had mentally abused her for years and that she just couldn't take it anymore.
I knew that was the only way.
Although according to Christine, the crash wasn't exactly premeditated. She claimed that she and Charlie had been arguing on the drive home when she saw the tree up ahead.
She just snapped and decided, it's time.
Christine said that when she saw that tree coming at her, it was one of the most beautiful things she'd ever seen.
According to Christine, it was supposed to be the last thing she ever saw, too.
Kevin, seriously, with all my true heart, I tell you this. When I hit that tree, I was expecting to be dead.
She claimed this was supposed to be a murder-suicide.
That's how bad it was. That I was fine with dying. I knew that if God said I had to die too, that he was going to take care of my kids. I weren't worried about it.
That's what Christine said on the tape. But would anyone else back up her abuse claims? Over the next few weeks, the state police investigators started looking into it.
You have witnesses that were saying that the two were always at each other.
However, no one claimed that their bickering had ever crossed the line.
In the year or two that I'd known and hung out with them, I hadn't seen any abuse.
Every couple is gonna have their moments. They've never laid a hand on each other.
Increasingly skeptical about Christine's abuse claims, the investigators decided it was time to confront her directly. On April 25th, they dropped by her house to ask a few questions, a visit she initially assumed had something to do with her insurance claim.
The insurance company said that they had to go through the court in order to be able to pay the claim.
Is this life insurance or auto insurance?
Auto insurance, $100,000.
There was a big chunk of insurance money.
Money that Christine appeared anxious to collect.
Well, we've been going over this since the car crash.
Yeah.
And now it's April 11. What the heck?
But then, after allowing Christine to go on at length about her insurance troubles, the investigators told her the truth.
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know what's going on with your insurance claim, nor have I spoken with your insurance adjuster or anything.
Right.
Then the investigator came right out and told Christine why he was there.
Have you ever told anyone that you've intentionally crashed your car to kill your husband?
Put on the spot, Christine didn't so much as blink.
No.
Have you ever told anyone you intentionally crashed your car to kill yourself?
No.
Okay. Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay. Because I've listened to hours of phone calls.
He led her to believe that they tapped her phone and her computer, and that's how they knew the information.
And the investigators made it clear that they knew it all.
I heard you talk about at one point how you crashed the car and you didn't care whether you lived or died. You were going to let God decide the outcome. This is the stuff I've heard you say to other people.
Then, once letting her know just how much they had on her, the investigators offered Christine one more chance.
Do you have anything else you want to say?
Not at this moment.
Christine didn't have anything else to say to the investigators, but once they wrapped up their questions and left, she quickly got in touch with Kevin unaware that he was cooperating with the state police.
She tells Kevin, quote, "I'm busted."
She thought she was going to jail.
She wouldn't be going right away, though. Instead, the investigators let her stew for several weeks while they got their case in order. And by the beginning of June, she'd had enough. On June 6th, Christine contacted the investigators and requested they come back so she could give them a second, very different statement.
So I wasn't exactly truthful last time.
As she confessed outright.
Christine not only admitted that she had purposefully killed Charlie, she claimed that she'd had no choice.
Christine claimed that he was threatening physical abuse as well, that he threatened to kill her.
I just couldn't take it anymore.
She would rather not live than continue in this life.
I thought we were both gonna die.
And she claimed that she had initially been disappointed when she didn't die in the crash.
I remember thinking, can I do anything right?
But then, once she realized that Charlie was gone, Christine admitted that she'd felt relieved.
And at the hospital, I didn't hear him yelling at me. First time. In 10 years.
On June 6, 2011, it had been almost 2 years since Charlie Billis died in a bizarre car crash outside tiny Brownington, Vermont.
Charles and Christine headed home on Route 5A towards Brownington, and Christine veered into a tree and struck it.
Police were a little suspicious about the crash because she went straight into the tree. Without skid marks, there was no intent to stop.
And that afternoon, Christine had just confirmed what the state police and many of Charlie's friends had long suspected, that she had driven into a tree on purpose.
What was your intent of hitting that tree?
I thought we were both gonna die. That was what I thought was gonna happen.
Christine has tried to convince people that it was going to be a murder-suicide.
However, the state police had reason to doubt her.
She basically picked someone's brain who had crashed a truck purposely.
How the driver had belted himself in, padded themselves with pillows and a full-face motorcycle helmet. As soon as I told that story, it's like I could see the gears going in Chrissy's brain.
There was no evidence Christine had taken those extra precautions, but there was also no evidence to support her claim that Charlie had been abusive.
The guy didn't have an abusive bone in his body.
I'd never seen him be abusive to her at all, either physically or psychologically.
Instead, the state police believed that they had uncovered Christine's real motive for wanting Charlie dead, one that she had hinted at in her first interview with the police.
Well, the insurance company said that they had to go through the court in order to be able to pay the claim.
And her $100,000 auto insurance claim wasn't the only payout either.
Her children were the beneficiary of a life insurance policy.
It was a $300,000 insurance policy. There's the motive right there.
Her husband's death had also entitled her to collect survivor benefits from Social Security.
I think that she wanted to be free of him and get a check in the mail every month.
And then there were the kids to think about, too.
She wouldn't have to go through any kind of a divorce where her kids might be under his custody.
No messy custody dispute, a cash payout, and a confession. As far as the police and prosecutors were concerned, it all added up to one thing.
They had a case of premeditated murder.
There seemed to be mountains of evidence.
However, despite all the evidence they'd uncovered, the state police didn't arrest Christine just yet. Instead, after getting her confession on tape, they left.
He gave her, a few days to get her affairs in order.
That wasn't the only reason they'd held off on making an arrest, though, because for all their evidence, there were still some potential holes in the prosecution's case. One was the medication she'd been taking prior to the crash, a drug called Chantix.
People take Chantix to quit smoking.
However, since the crash, the drug had been at the center of a number of lawsuits alleging some potentially serious side effects, including some that could work to the defense's advantage.
Some of the adverse effects are psychosis, hallucination, paranoia, delusion, homicidal ideation, aggression, anxiety and panic, as well as suicidal ideation. All of these are on the black box warnings.
And that wasn't the only medication Christine had been taking. At the time of the crash, she'd also been taking a prescription sleep aid.
The FDA actually held that the dosage that Christine was taking was a harmful dose, that it was causing drowsy driving, and they ordered that any future prescriptions for that medication be cut in half immediately.
In addition to the possible complications presented by Christine's medications, the prosecutors also had reservations about the person who'd helped them secure Christine's confession, a blogger and self-styled social media reporter named Kevin Leland.
Kevin refers to this as his big scoop.
He was definitely after fame.
Was it possible he'd preyed on Christine? The defense was sure to suggest it.
It's clear he manipulated her. She was in a very fragile state. All of the mental health records show that she felt responsible for her husband's death.
Kevin denied manipulating Christine, but there were also questions about the tapes he had made of his conversations with her.
I've never seen an instance where the police rely on an informant to provide the recording device.
And that could make the prosecution's case vulnerable.
So there's no independent evidence of where the conversations took place and when they took place. There's no reliable date stamp on his digital recorder. The state can't prove that those conversations were obtained within the windows authorized by the warrant.
However, despite their reservations, the Orleans County District Attorney's Office gave a green light to the arrest on June 28th.
She was just crying, and I'm like, what's wrong? And she's just like, I'm going away.
And then Christine turned herself in, still completely unaware that her friend Kevin was the one who'd led the police to her.
I drove her to the station.
Not only that, but he sat with her while the state police completed the booking process.
I prayed with her, and they let her, go out and smoke a cigarette, and then I left, and they took her away.
She was charged with first-degree murder.
On November 2nd, 2012, Christine Billis was led into a Newport, Vermont courtroom. The 45-year-old mother of three had been accused of killing her husband, Charlie, in September of 2009 by intentionally ramming their car into a tree.
She was charged with first-degree murder, and she was facing life in prison.
However, shortly before she was scheduled to stand trial, the case had taken an abrupt turn.
Kevin Leland got caught trying to enter the U.S. from Canada with several narcotics in his possession, as well as a loaded .357 Magnum and a marijuana pipe.
That's going to raise some serious doubts about his credibility in the minds of the jury.
And that was on top of his other drawbacks as a witness.
He had blogged about his role in this extensively, and he had indicated that he wanted to make money off it.
That's not the type of person you want as your star witness at trial.
The prosecution quickly realized that their case was unraveling.
So in July of 2012, the prosecutors had approached Christine with a possible plea deal.
It was a plea deal for manslaughter. That was a huge surprise.
Christine took the deal.
She enters a plea ultimately of guilty to involuntary manslaughter.
As a defense attorney, where a client is looking at life, a deal that nets somebody less than that is usually considered to be a good deal.
And she was in court that November morning for her sentencing.
This is Christine's last chance for any type of leniency from the judge. This is a chance for her to explain herself and what led up to her decision.
But it was a chance she refused to take.
She didn't say a word. She didn't even say she was sorry.
Instead, she listened in silence as the judge sentenced her to serve 7 to 15 years in prison.
We have indeterminate sentencing here in Vermont, so you get a minimum and a maximum.
Most people don't do the max.
Which was a bitter disappointment for many of Charlie's friends.
She only gets 7 years. I don't think it even remotely constitutes justice. It's a travesty.
This was planned in advance. It was intentional. It was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. And so I think she got off very lightly.
Light or not, Charlie's friends can at least take comfort in the fact that she's in prison.
She almost got away with the perfect crime, and the only reason she got caught was because she opened her mouth.
But did she get caught because she was guilty? Or was it, as her daughter believes, because she had confided in the wrong person?
My personal point of view is that my mother is now in jail because Kevin saw the opportunity and he went for it.
She didn't say I intended to, like I meant to do it on purpose. But he convinced her that she did.
See that? That was amazing. I love this.
The verdant expanse of Vermont, a tapestry of forest-covered mountains and quaint white-clapboard farmhouses, often beckons with the promise of serene escape. For Christine and Charlie Billis, this promise held a particular allure, a siren song of tranquility far removed from the clamor and hurried pace of urban life. They had, by their own account, sought refuge and quietude, renting an old farmhouse in the heart of Vermont's northeast kingdom, envisioning a life unburdened by the relentless thrum of the city. Their choice of Brownington, a tiny village south of the Canadian border, with its mere 900 residents, epitomized their desire for seclusion. Indeed, as many locals and admirers of the region would attest, it presented a postcard-perfect tableau, especially in autumn, when the foliage burst into a riot of vivid colors. This was to be their sanctuary, a place where the clamor of the world could truly fade. However, even in the most idyllic of settings, the threads of fate can entangle, and one small, seemingly insignificant misstep can unravel an entire existence. On a seemingly unremarkable country road, a road that had, until then, only borne witness to gentle breezes and the passing of routine, an act of shattering finality was about to unfold. The metallic shriek of a car colliding with an immovable force at high speed tore through the peaceful afternoon, a brutal interruption to the quiet hum of rural life, when the dust settled, or perhaps before it even had a chance to fully disperse. A grim reality emerged from the twisted metal and shattered glass. Christine had survived. Miraculously, almost inexplicably, she basically walked away from the accident. But Charlie, her husband, was denied the same reprieve, a critical oversight, a fleeting moment of inattention or deliberate defiance of safety. He was not wearing a seatbelt. This absence, this simple lack of protective restraint, sealed his fate in the most tragic and immediate manner. The pronouncement was stark, delivered with a detached professionalism that only served to underscore the raw, visceral pain of the moment. She was just like, well, your dad didn't make it. The aftermath of such an event always ushers in a period of intense scrutiny, a meticulous dissection of what transpired in those fateful seconds. The investigation, as is often the case with incidents that defy immediate logical explanation, immediately raise a multitude of questions, each one heavier than the last. Why did this car, traversing a pretty straight road, under clear weather conditions, inexplicably veer off the road and slam head-on into a tree? The absence of skid marks, those telltale signatures of an attempt to avert disaster, only deepened the mystery, suggesting there was no intent to stop. Was it merely a tragic accident, a lamentable consequence of circumstance and poor health, perhaps exacerbated by a momentary lapse in Christine's consciousness. It was noted in the early stages that she was on a lot of medication. This, coupled with initial observations that she's convulsing, EMTs think she's going into shock, led to a plausible, if unproven, theory. They think she may have had a seizure. The human mind, grappling with tragedy, often seeks the simplest, most comprehensible explanation, and a medical emergency certainly fit that description. Yet, lurking beneath the veneer of accident, casting long, unsettling shadows over their idyllic country life, was a chilling whisper of a far more sinister possibility. Could conceal something darker? For some, those who had observed the subtle dissonances in the Billis household, a different narrative began to form, one born of suspicion and fueled by perceived grievances. "She killed my best friend," one confidant would later assert, his words laced with conviction and raw pain. "And she just snapped," another might surmise, pointing to a breaking point, a moment of profound psychological rupture where the unbearable pressures of life coalesced into a destructive impulse. Or perhaps, and this was a contemplation too grim for many to initially entertain, there was a deeper, more insidious design, a premeditated act camouflaged by the cloak of an accident, a consequence of one person deciding that he just couldn't take it anymore, but interpreting that sentiment for the other. The initial puzzle of the crash soon evolved into a far more complex enigma, hinting at human frailties, hidden resentments, and the darkest recesses of the human heart. It was a journey from rural tragedy to profound criminal inquiry, a path that would eventually peel back the layers of a carefully constructed facade to reveal an uncomfortable and unsettling truth. Let us transport ourselves back to that fateful afternoon, September 22nd, 2009, in the tranquil embrace of Brownington, Vermont. It was by all accounts a crisp fall day in Vermont's northeast kingdom, a phrase that evokes images of vibrant autumnal splendor, clean air, and a gentle sigh of nature preparing for winter. This picturesque region, famous for its forest-covered mountains and white-clapboard farmhouses, seemed a haven, a place where such stark brutality should never intrude. As the narrative succinctly puts it, it's probably the most beautiful part of the state. It's your postcard picture. On that particular day, the colors would have been ablaze, the foliage changing with a magnificent intensity, painting the landscape in hues of crimson, gold, and burnt orange, a breathtaking backdrop for what was about to unfold. But at approximately 4:15 that Tuesday afternoon, the bucolic peace, a hallmark of this isolated locale, was shattered with startling suddenness. For one unassuming farm family, whose home stood just outside the tiny village, the quiet symphony of the countryside was brutally interrupted by an unforgiving cacophony. The people who lived in the home said it was a loud crash, just this big boom. It was a sound that, once heard, cannot be easily forgotten, a sound that speaks of impact, destruction, and sudden catastrophe. Galvanized by the raw urgency of the noise, the frightened family members rushed outside, their hearts undoubtedly pounding with a mixture of dread and curiosity, to ascertain the source of the deafening roar. What they discovered was a scene of immediate and profound wreckage. A car had smashed into the huge oak tree in their front yard. The force of the impact was visibly evident, indicating that the car hit the tree with great force at high speed. This wasn't fender bender or a minor mishap. This was a collision of significant, indeed devastating magnitude. The vehicle bore the grotesque scars of an encounter with the unyielding trunk, leaving it heavily damaged, a mangled testament to the energies unleashed. Without hesitation, the family initiated the vital lifeline of emergency services, dialing 911, their voices likely laced with urgency and a tremor of fear. In the moments immediately following that critical call, they exhibited an admirable presence of mind and courage, managing to approach the wreckage and bravely free the driver of the car, 42-year-old Christine Billis, The logistics of her extraction, a fortunate byproduct of the impact geometry, allowed for a relatively easy rescue. They're able to get her out easily because her side of the car is not as heavily damaged as the passenger side, as Christine was carefully extricated. The initial assessment provided a glimmer of relief amidst the shock, while Christine appeared shaken by the crash. A perfectly natural and expected reaction to such a traumatic event. She was also remarkably, extremely lucky. The raw statistics of such high-speed collisions often tell a far more gruesome tale. But in Christine's case, an improbable resilience was displayed. Christine wasn't injured at all. She basically walked away from the accident. It was a detail that would, in time, become a focal point of intense scrutiny and analysis. An almost too convenient outcome that would later fuel deep-seated suspicions. Tragically, the same fortune did not extend to her husband. 57-year-old Charlie Billis remained agonizingly trapped inside the wreckage until emergency crews arrived on the scene. The very side of the car that had spared Christine was the one that had brutally crumpled around, Charlie pinning him in an iron grip. The arriving rescue crews had to use the jaws of life to get Charlie out of the vehicle, a testament to the severe structural integrity failure of the vehicle and the direness of his situation. Even once freed, the hope for Charlie was dim, flickering like a candle in a gale. The stark reality painted by the emergency personnel was devoid of sugarcoating. And even when they did get him out, the prognosis wasn't good, and they weren't sure if he was going to make it. The immediate cause of Charlie's catastrophic injuries, at least from a purely mechanical perspective, was disarmingly clear, a devastating consequence of a simple oversight. Charles didn't have a seatbelt on. He struck the windshield, the dashboard, the roof of the vehicle. This violent, unrestrained impact against the interior of the car left him gravely injured, his body bearing the full, unmitigated force of collision. While the cause of Charlie's injuries may have been obvious to the emergency workers, presenting a clear-cut case of blunt force trauma due to lack of restraint, the larger enigma persisted, hovering over the scene like a shroud. As the ambulance, lights flashing and sirens wailing, raced Charlie towards North Country Hospital in Newport, leaving behind the wreckage and the stunned onlookers. The core puzzle of the incident gnawed at the emergency personnel and, crucially, the nascent accident investigation team. What had caused the crash? The immediate environment offered no clear answers. The road itself was cooperative. There were no skin marks. It shows that there was no intent to stop. This lack of pre-impact braking or steering maneuvers immediately ruled out certain scenarios. A frantic swerve to avoid an animal. A sudden, desperate attempt to regain control from a loss of traction. The environmental conditions, often significant contributors to road accidents, were equally benign. The weather conditions were clear. No rain, no ice, no fog to obscure visibility or compromise grip. Whatever elusive factor compelled Christine to veer so abruptly and directly off the road, to drive head-on into an immovable obstacle, was far less clear. The questions remained, hanging heavy in the crisp Vermont air. And when the answers, or at least a compelling hypothesis, finally began to materialize, casting the accident in a stark and unforgiving light, Christine would discover that the truth about the crash proved to be far harder to walk away from than the physical wreckage itself. To truly comprehend the unfolding drama, one must first delve into the lives that intersected so violently on that quiet Vermont road. Born in 1967, Christine Skorker had spent her formative years navigating the landscape of Massachusetts. Her family, with a history deeply intertwined with the land, could trace its ancestral roots back to a local Native American tribe, the Mapak. As Christine herself would later confirm, this heritage, while often unspoken in the rush of daily life, likely provided a subtle undercurrent of identity and resilience within her family's narrative. Her childhood unfolded in the Boston suburbs, a setting often characterized by a hard-working, blue-collar ethos. They were, by all accounts, very church-coming people. They're Baptists, and that was a big part of their life. A foundational pillar that instilled a strong sense of community, moral grounding, and, as we shall see, enduring faith. Christine's path diverged from what might be considered conventional trajectory for many in her generation. Rather than pursuing higher education, a route often seen as a gateway to upward mobility, Christine never went to college. Her youthful years were marked by early entry into marital life and motherhood. She got married and had a daughter at 19 and another before turning 30. This decision, while common for some, set her on a course defined by early family responsibilities rather than academic pursuits. The complexities of life, however, often interject themselves into carefully laid plans. Her first marriage, like many, faced insurmountable challenges and ended in divorce soon after. This pivotal event left Christine, then a woman of 30, in a precarious and challenging position. A single mom struggling to raise a 2-year-old and a 10-year-old. The weight of this responsibility, particularly without a college degree or extensive professional experience, meant navigating the often difficult terrain of financial precarity. Christine never worked more than part-time here or there. Her employment history dotted with entry-level jobs, McDonald's, things like that. These were not careers designed for financial abundance, but for immediate subsistence. Yet, despite the inherent challenges in the constant tightrope walk of providing for her children, Christine possessed an unshakable dedication to her maternal role. But she always made sure that she provided for us, her daughter would recall, highlighting a deeply ingrained sense of duty and self-sacrifice. Even if it meant she had to go without, she would literally starve herself to make sure that her children ate that day. This poignant detail paints a picture of a mother whose love translated into a profound willingness to endure personal hardship for the well-being of her offspring. Moreover, she carried within her a quiet, unwavering optimism, and she always had faith that things would work out, a sentiment that, for a time at least, turned out to be true more or less. It was this very faith, deeply embedded from her upbringing, that served as a conduit, ultimately leading her to Charles Billis in 1998. Charlie, 15 years older than Christine, possessed a life story equally distinct and compelling. He, too, had spent a significant portion of his life rooted in Massachusetts, growing up, much like Christine, in the Boston area. However, his heritage diverged significantly from hers. Unlike Christine's Native American ancestry, Charles was originally from Greece. His journey to America, not one of mere immigration, but of a desperate, hope-filled quest for a miracle. Charlie's early life had been shrouded in the darkness of profound visual impairment. Charles was blind as a child. In a poignant testament to the unwavering hope and sacrifice of his parents took him from Greece and brought him to the United States, clutching the fervent belief to have an operation that would enable him to regain his sight. The annals of medical science, particularly in decades past, were replete with stories of both triumph and limited success. In Charlie's case, the outcome fell into the latter category. The operation was a limited success. While it spared him from total darkness, it left him with significantly compromised vision. He was technically legally blind, so he could see, but not very well. This partial restoration of sight meant navigating the world through a perpetual haze, a challenge that for many might prove debilitating. Yet, Charlie Billis, a man of remarkable spirit and ingenuity, refused to allow his visual impairment to define the limits of his existence. He possessed an intrinsic force of character that transcended his physical limitations, but he more than made up for his disability in other ways. Indeed, Charlie was a real character, a descriptor that suggests charisma, individuality, and a memorable presence. He was also real smart, indicating a sharp mind capable of compensating for sensory deficiencies through intellect and perceptiveness. What is perhaps most astonishing is his career choice, a profession often thought to demand keen visual acuity. And despite the fact that he was legally blind, Charlie even managed to make a modest living as a car salesman. This remarkable achievement was attributed to a singular talent. There's something he was really good at, talking people into things. It was a skill born of intellect, persuasive charm, and an intuitive understanding of human nature, making him adept at the art of the deal, even if the fine details of the vehicles themselves remained somewhat blurred to him. Beyond his professional life, Charlie also shared a profound connection to spirituality. Mirroring Christine's own upbringing, he was also very religious, a shared foundation that became the very nexus of their burgeoning relationship. This common thread led them to their fateful meeting in 1998, within the very walls of the church, a place of shared worship and community. They met through the church, which is super cute to me, remarked one observer, capturing the innocent romance of their initial encounter. Once the smooth-talking car salesman, Charlie Billis, encountered Christine, it appears his persuasive charm, honed in countless sales pitches, was successfully applied to a more personal endeavor. He quickly convinced the 31-year-old to go out on a date, and as the story often unfolds in tales of nascent love, one date led to another and another, building a momentum that culminated swiftly in commitment. Within a year, they were married, a testament to the speed and depth of their connection. Christine's daughters quickly embraced Charlie, a powerful affirmation of his positive influence and character. "My mom loved him," her daughter stated unequivocally, but, crucially, so did her daughters. "I consider him my dad. I mean, he's raised me since I was a little girl." This adoption of him as a paternal figure, a testament to his loving engagement, speaks volumes. He took interest in everything they did. I mean, he was a great guy with the kids. Charlie's capacity for warmth, care, and genuine interest filled a void, solidifying his place within their new blended family. Shortly after their marriage, the new family unit, Christine, Charlie, and her two daughters, made a significant geographic shift. They left the familiar bustle of Massachusetts behind and moved to northern Vermont. Their chosen abode was not a suburban tract home, but rather a return to the roots of rural living. They had rented an old farmhouse. The location epitomized their desire for retreat. It was outside the tiny village of Brownington, putting considerable distance between them and any urban conveniences. As Christine's daughter humorously but accurately observed, "We live like 20 miles from the nearest anything." This stark isolation, however, was precisely what Charlie craved. And that suited Charlie just fine. For him, Vermont offered an antidote to his visual impairment, a sensory richness that compensated for what he couldn't fully discern with his eyes. "My dad just fell in love with Vermont because it's so beautiful up here. The grandeur of the landscape, the clean air, the sense of vastness, these were qualities that appealed profoundly to him. More fundamentally, it was quiet and it was away from the city and all the noise, a serene backdrop against which he could lead a calmer, perhaps more contented, existence." For the initial first few years of their Vermont life, Charlie maintained a semblance of his former professional life, albeit on a smaller scale. He continued to work a dealership in Orleans, while his role as a car salesman provided a modest salary that contributed to the family's upkeep. His legal blindness inherently limited his independence. Living in the sparsely populated countryside, where public transport was non-existent and distances between destinations significant, meant he relied on Christine's support more than ever. Her role as a chauffeur was not merely a convenience, but a necessity. Christine had to drive him everywhere. Without her, he wouldn't be able to get around. This symbiotic relationship, while initially perhaps seen as a simple division of labor, laid the groundwork for a dependency that would later be viewed in a far more sinister light. Despite this increased reliance, Christine outwardly appeared equally happy about the move. Her commitment to their new life in Vermont was further solidified within a year of their arrival. She gave birth to her third daughter, Charlie's first and her third, expanding their family and anchoring them more firmly to their rural roots. As a mother, Christine garnered commendation. She was a terrific mom. She really doted on her kids, never failed to give them a lot of hugs and tell them that she loved them. This portrait painted her as a caring, affectionate parent, devoted to her children's emotional well-being. Furthermore, in those early years, she was perceived as a vibrant and engaged individual. She was just a great person. She was happy all the time. She was really involved with the people around her. She had friends. She's an active member of the church. This image of a joyful, integrated, and community-minded individual stood in stark contrast to the persona that would later emerge. However, the inexorable march of time inevitably brought forth changes. By 2005, a significant shift occurred within the Billis family dynamic. Christine's oldest daughter had grown up and moved out on her own, a natural progression that, while celebrated, altered the household's composition and possibly its economic contributions. More consequentially for the family's financial stability, Charlie left his part-time job as a car salesman. This departure meant that the family relied on Charlie's disability check to survive, shifting their income stream from earned wages to fixed government benefits. This transition, while perhaps necessitated by health or age, placed greater economic strain on the household. They'd never been well off, but with Charlie no longer selling cars, things were tighter than ever before. The family was strapped for cash. Poverty, a constant shadow for many families, became a more pronounced presence, a pervasive stressor in their daily lives. Despite the financial limitations, Charlie, ever the resourceful and active individual, was not content to sit around idle. He possessed an innate desire to remain active in community, to contribute and to engage. His sharp mind and natural communicative abilities found a new outlet in volunteerism. He began dedicating his time at NEKTV, which was, as described, the local public education and government access channel. This was a perfect match for his outgoing personality and his love for interaction. In fact, Charlie's engagement rapidly evolved beyond mere volunteerism. He was soon hosting his own offbeat show, introducing himself with characteristic charm. "I'm your co-host, Charlie Billis." He delighted in this new venture. He had a wicked sense of humor, an endearing trait that surely captivated his audience. His program, aptly named Public Forum, allowed him to indulge his passion for human connection. He would interview people. He found immense satisfaction in being able to talk to people in the community about the issues. And the sentiment was clearly reciprocal. And people loved talking to Charlie. Too, he was a great person to have a conversation with. His intelligence shone through his unrehearsed, authentic delivery. Never any notes. Everything was off the top of his head. He had an incredible memory. It was very sharp. The show, a reflection of Charlie's vibrant personality, proved to be a hit. For both Charlie and Christine, this creative endeavor provided a powerful and positive focal point. That was pretty exciting for them both, offering a shared project and a sense of purpose. Christine, in her customary supporting role, played an integral part behind the scenes. She put a lot of work into productions and did the camera work and the editing and that stuff. This collaboration, this shared artistic pursuit, it really gave them something to focus on. However, despite the immense satisfaction derived from their work, a practical and immutable reality persisted. However, since it was strictly volunteer work, it didn't give them much to live on. The financial strain, which had become a constant companion, continued to tighten its grip. They were very poor. They were living on a fixed income. The juxtaposition of creative fulfillment and stark financial reality underscored the persistent challenges they faced. By 2007, the financial woes were not the only shadows lengthening over Christine. Her physical health, despite her relatively young age, began to deteriorate. Although she'd only just turned 40, Christine was in poor health. She was diabetic. This chronic condition, requiring careful management, added another layer of daily challenge. Then, in a truly alarming development, in the spring of 2009, Christine received a devastating diagnosis. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. This news, striking fear into the heart of any individual, necessitated immediate and aggressive medical intervention. She underwent a total hysterectomy. Thankfully, the operation proved a success, offering a profound sense of relief that the immediate threat had been neutralized. This harrowing cancer scare, however, served as a powerful catalyst for Christine to reevaluate and reprioritize her health habits. The brush with mortality prompted a resolve to make another positive change in her health, too. A long-standing habit, one she knew to be detrimental, finally became a target for eradication. She's trying to quit smoking. It was something that she had always really wanted to do, and she knew that it was a bad habit, and she wanted to be a good role model to us. This ambition to quit was not undertaken without assistance. And this time, she had help. She was prescribed a medication, Chantix, to help, quit. Chantix, a well-known smoking cessation aid, promised relief from nicotine cravings and withdrawal symptoms, but as many users discover, it can also come with a suite of less desirable side effects. As a result, as the afternoon of September 22nd, 2009, dawned, bringing with it the vivid autumnal beauty of Vermont, Christine, as she drove Charlie to the NEK-TV studio to tape the latest episode of his show, Maya felt a nascent stirring of hope. It seemed that things were once again looking up for Christine. The cancer was, for now, in remission. She was actively tackling a deeply ingrained addiction. In the familiar atmosphere of the studio, a sense of shared purpose and lightheartedness prevailed. I could hear her laughing behind the camera, a seemingly innocuous detail that, in retrospect, takes on a chilling irony. The taping concluded, the episode complete. Christine and Charlie, husband and wife, co-workers and partners in their modest media venture, got into her car and headed off into the late September afternoon. The beauty of the moment was undeniable. Late September, the leaves are changing colors, especially in the northern part of the state. It's beautiful. They embarked on their routine drive, heading home towards Brownington, enveloped by the stunning scenery. But on this gorgeous Vermont afternoon, a sharp and irreversible turn of events was about to be inscribed into their history. Her life with Charlie, so intricately woven, was about to come to a sudden, devastating end. The very serenity they had sought would be brutally juxtaposed against an act of profound violence, an ending that few could have foreseen, or perhaps even fully believed possible. The narrative shifts, sharpening its focus from the background to the immediate, visceral moments of the disaster. On the afternoon of September 22nd, 2009, the rural quietude was indeed shattered. State troopers and local EMTs rushed to the scene of an accident outside the tiny Vermont village of Brownington. A somber procession of flashing lights and wailing sirens, converging on the epicenter of chaos. The scene itself, as described by eyewitnesses and recorded by first responders, was grim and unambiguous. There's this car that just slammed into a tree. It was a singular, powerful impact, devoid of other variables or contributing vehicles. The driver of this unfortunate vehicle was identified as 42-year-old Christine Billis. Her physical state, initially, offered a deceptive sense of relief. She had some minor, certainly non-life-threatening injuries. This apparent escape from significant physical harm would, as we noted, become a recurring point of dark conjecture. However, her emotional and psychological state was far from unscathed, although she did appear badly shaken by the impact. This understatement belies the more alarming observations made by the medical personnel. She's convulsing. EMTs think she's going into shock. These physical manifestations, the uncontrollable shaking, The generalized seizure-like activity immediately raised red flags for the responders, signaling a potential medical emergency rather than a mere emotional reaction. Meanwhile, the grim reality unfolded for her husband. 57-year-old Charles Billis was in far worse shape. The critical detail of his lack of restraint reiterated the immediate cause of his catastrophic injuries. Charles was not wearing a seatbelt. The physics of the impact had been unforgiving, catapulting his body violently against the interior of the car, leaving him seriously injured. Both Charles and Christine were swiftly transported, though with vastly different prognoses, to North Country Hospital in Newport, the nearest medical facility capable of handling severe trauma. The initial shockwave of the accident reached beyond the immediate scene, rippling out to touch those whose lives were intimately connected to the Billis family. Not long after the collision, the highway patrol carried the somber news to Christine's teenage daughter, Karina, who had just returned home from school, expecting the routine comfort of her afternoon. The police showed up. The cop just comes in. The initial feeling was one of mild annoyance, a minor inconvenience, tinged with a dash of teenage nonchalance. It was like when your parents went off-road. It was just like not a big deal. You think maybe they drove into a ditch or the tire popped or something. Accidents in rural areas, particularly minor ones, are not unheard of. A deer, a patch of ice, though not on this day. A momentary distraction. These were common enough occurrences. But the highway patrolman's solemn demeanor, his deliberate pause, conveyed a gravity that transcended mere car trouble. He hadn't finished, and the words that followed landed like a physical blow. It was just like, well, your dad didn't make it. The blunt finality of the statement would forever sear itself into Karina's memory. The explanation, while clinical, confirmed the worst. Charles basically bled out at the scene. Despite the valiant efforts to transport him and the rapid medical intervention that surely awaited. At the hospital, his injuries were too profound, too extensive, and by the time he reached the ER, there was nothing the doctors could do. The doctors tried everything, but shortly after arrival, they pronounced him dead. The shock that enveloped Charlie's stepdaughter was profound, leaving her in a state of disbelieving numbness. I'm like, how do I process this? I'm like really confused. The sudden, brutal truncation of life leaves one grappling not just with grief, but with an overwhelming sense of cognitive dissonance. Yet, despite her personal anguish, an instinctual pull to her surviving parent guided her actions. She did rush to the hospital to be with her mother, who was being kept under observation. The reunion was fraught with raw emotion and lingering disorientation. She just reached out her arms and was crying on my shoulder, and I'm still really confused. Christine, too, despite having physically walked away from the accident, appeared emotionally and cognitively unmoored. She was perceived as more than a little disoriented after the ordeal. It was this disoriented state, observed firsthand by medical professionals, that continued to fuel the initial theory regarding the crash's causation. The EMTs thought maybe she had a seizure leading up to crash. This medical hypothesis offered compelling explanation for her post-impact physical presentation. It would certainly explain her uncontrollable shaking and convulsions after crash. It provided a framework that, while tragic, absolved human intention. But this was merely a working theory, a plausible explanation for her immediate physiological reaction. The underlying question of what about the crash itself persisted, begging for a more comprehensive answer. Why did this car just veer off the road and slam head-on into a tree? As Christine remained under medical observation in the ER, separated from the ongoing field investigation, accident investigators from the Highway Patrol began their meticulous process, trying to piece together the fractured reality of what had transpired. Their objective was to determine what caused the crash. What they found, or rather, what they didn't find, seemed to defy rational explanation. The ground where the vehicle should have provided a signature of braking offered nothing. There were no skid marks. This singular detail, the absence of any defensive maneuvers, immediately raised a critical question mark over the narrative of an uncontrolled accident. The environment, usually a factor, was benign. The weather was fine. It was dry. It was sunny. No rain-slicked roads, no blinding fog, no glare from a setting sun. Even the road's topography offered no inherent peril. And it wasn't a particularly dangerous stretch of road either. It's a pretty straight road in that area. One eyewitness added succinctly, there's like one tree right there on the side of the road, underscoring the pinpoint accuracy or terrifying directness of the collision. The regularity with which the Billis family traversed this particular route only deepened the investigative conundrum. In fact, Christine and Charlie had passed that way hundreds of times before. It's a route they drove every day. Familiarity, in normal circumstances, breeds caution and awareness. It was not like this road was unfamiliar to them. Ruling out navigational error or momentary disorientation due to an unknown environment. Given this constellation of puzzling factors, the straight road, clear weather, lack of skid marks, and driver familiarity, the investigators at the scene had a hard time understanding just how Christine could have hit the tree. The pieces simply didn't fit the picture of a routine, if tragic, car accident. It was as if a crucial piece of the puzzle was deliberately missing, leaving only one deeply disturbing, unspoken possibility to fill the void, unless she'd been trying. The psychological leap from accident to intention is a profound one for any investigator, demanding extraordinary evidence. But in the hushed contemplation of the scene, with all the objective data presenting an almost deliberate impact, the police had suspicions about whether there had been an intentional crash. However, official pronouncements required definitive proof, and raw suspicion, no matter how compelling, does not equate to prosecutable evidence. And so, by the time Charlie was buried a week later, a somber ceremony where grief mingled with unasked questions, most of the people who weren't privy to the details of the crash still assumed he died in a tragic car accident. The communal sympathy flowed towards Christine, the grieving widow. I attended the funeral. Folks were very sad. Our hearts went out to Christine and to his family, a testament to the community's immediate and heartfelt condolences. But in the quiet corners of the NEKTV studio, a different narrative began to fester. Slowly at first, then gaining insidious momentum. But not everyone's hearts went out to Christine. Among her fellow volunteers at the TV station, a group privy to the daily rhythms and underlying tensions of the Billis' relationship, the speculation was rampant. Whispers began to circulate, coalescing into more direct action. Co-workers started going to the police, saying, you might really want to take a closer look. The unspoken question, stark and accusatory, began to echo in the halls of justice. Was this an accident, or was this Christine killing Charlie on purpose? According to these fellow volunteers, the Billis household, despite its outward projection of rural serenity and shared purpose, had been experiencing considerable friction. They knew the Billises were having some marital problems. These weren't isolated incidents, but rather a discernible pattern. They have had their moments where, they're both yelling. The specific content of these altercations often center around Christine's perceived failings, particularly from Charlie's perspective. Charlie had accused her of being lazy and whatnot. Such bickering, while unpleasant, is not uncommon in any long-term relationship. Many had shrugged it off, dismissing it as typical marital discord. I thought it was just Charlie, complaining. The human tendency to normalize observed behaviors often prevents a deeper, more concerning interpretation. Furthermore, a specific, contemporary factor offered a seemingly benign explanation for Christine's recent irritability, which could, theoretically, account for heightened tension in the car. It was just because she was quitting smoking. That's what happens to people. They get grumpy and cranky. The effects of nicotine withdrawal, combined with the mood-altering properties of Chantix, could easily explain a volatile temperament, a plausible reason for increased arguments and friction. Yet a singular, profoundly unsettling detail began to surface, an incident that had been compartmentalized and dismissed by one of Charlie's friends in Tilda. Crushing news of his death recontextualized it with horrifying clarity. But there was something else. An incident Charlie's friend, Steve Merrill, had been stewing over since the accident. Steve, wrestling with the implications, felt compelled to bring this information to the attention of the state police. According to what Steve told the state police, the incident had occurred about a month before the crash that killed Charlie. It was a casual conversation, seemingly innocent at the time, yet retrospectively loaded with sinister implication. Me and Chrissy were talking now back during a cigarette break. In that unguarded moment, as nicotine calmed frayed nerves, they drifted into general conversation. And one of the things they talked about was a story that Steve hadn't thought much about at the time. He recounted an anecdote, a tale of resourcefulness born of desperation, involving one of his acquaintances. He had told her how his friend had committed insurance fraud. The mechanics of this fraud, the detailed execution of the scheme, were what resonated with such chilling prescience for Steve Merrill. But what was really interesting was how Steve's friend had pulled it off by crashing his car on purpose. The motive for this deliberate act of vehicular destruction was prosaic, driven by frustration rather than malice. The car was a lemon. It was always in the garage, and the only way to get rid of it in their eyes was to total it. It was a cunning, if illicit, solution to a persistent problem. And the specific method, according to Steve, the details of the story, details he'd share with Christine, sound awfully familiar. The driver had belted himself in, put on a full-face motorcycle helmet and a pillow, and driven it into a tree. The parallels of Charlie's death, the direct, unbraked collision with a tree, struck Steve with an appalling force. The question began to haunt him. Was it possible that Steve's story had planted the seed of a murder plot? For Steve Merrill, the conviction grew, hardening into a certainty that he could no longer ignore. Charlie's friend was convinced. She killed him. She did it intentionally. When Steve Merrill courageously took his story to the state police, presenting his chilling suspicion based on that cigarette break conversation, he was met, understandably, with a degree of skepticism. Law enforcement, accustomed to dealing with both rational explanations and emotional outpouring of grief or anger, must exercise stringent caution before launching a full-scale murder investigation. The psychological leap from a whispered conversation about insurance fraud to a premeditated act of spousal murder is immense, requiring solid substantiation. The initial reaction from the police was one of doubt, questioning the very logic of such an extreme act. I'm going to take my car, and this is the perfect way to murder my husband without hurting myself. That makes no sense to me. The immediate counter-argument was rational. If one intends murder while sparing oneself, one typically employs methods that guarantee personal safety, not ones that place the perpetrator in direct, high-speed collision risk. And they were hesitant to open a murder investigation based on a single conversation during a smoke break. The human impulse to find patterns and connect dots, especially in the wake of tragedy, can sometimes lead to erroneous conclusions. At that initial juncture, from an objective, evidence-based standpoint, there was absolutely no evidence to substantiate suspicions that this crash was intentional. Indeed, a far more logical explanation for the crash remained highly plausible, centering on Christine's escalating health issues and the pharmacological landscape she was navigating. In June, a mere 3 months before the accident, Christine had confronted the profound terror of an ovarian cancer diagnosis, which necessitated a total hysterectomy. The surgery, though successful in eradicating the immediate threat, left her navigating a complex post-operative recovery, not just physically, but emotionally and pharmacologically, she was on a lot of medication. This phrase, seemingly simple, hints at a delicate balance of chemicals altering brain chemistry and physical states. Beyond the physical recovery, the cancer scare had also caused her to try and quit smoking, a commendable effort that, ironically, added another layer of complexity to assist her in this challenging endeavor, leading her to take a drug called Chantix. Chantix, while effective for many, is a powerful medication. People take Chantix to quit smoking. There are other effects of it, but for the most part, it's to quit smoking. And those other effects are precisely what caught the attention of investigators and later defense attorneys. The potential for psychiatric side effects with Chantix, including mood disturbances and behavioral changes, was even then a recognized, albeit debated, concern within the medical community. Furthermore, Christine's health problems were not merely physical. The cumulative stress of illness, surgery, financial hardship, and attempting to break an addiction had taken a considerable toll on her emotions. She was seeing a mental health counselor, indicating a recognized need for psychological support during this tumultuous period. This therapeutic intervention involved prescribed medications, underscoring the severity of her emotional state. Christine was taking 2 different antidepressants. The confluence of these prescribed substances, each targeting a different physiological or psychological system, created a complex pharmacological cocktail within her body. And one of those other effects led to the final drug that Christine had started taking in the weeks leading up to the crash. Chantix, while suppressing nicotine cravings, often disrupts sleep patterns. Chantix caused insomnia and some other things which caused her to take the Ambien. Ambien, a potent sedative hypnotic, designed to induce sleep, carries its own set of potential side effects, particularly if not taken precisely as prescribed or combined with other central nervous system depressants. The crucial question then arose: how did Ambien, Chantix, and the antidepressants interact within Christine's system? When combined, such a polypharmacy regimen could, and apparently did, produce some disturbing results. Her family and friends observed a marked shift in her personality. It just made her kind of a different person. The vibrant, engaged Christine they knew seemed to recede, replaced by a more subdued, detached individual. She used to be really bubbly. She would cook a lot. She's a great chef. She would make the best soups. You know, her daughter recalled, painting a picture of a woman diminished by her current state. And after starting all these medicines, they prescribed her. She just kind of fell out of it. She didn't really have interest in things anymore. This depressive, anhedonic state was a stark change, one that her family largely attributed to the therapeutic agents designed to help her. But did these medications do more than simply alter her mood and reduce her interest in daily activities? A critical piece of information emerged from Christine herself, suggesting a more alarming and direct impact on her cognitive functions and awareness. The day before the crash, Christine had gone to her doctor complaining about fatigue and drowsiness. This was not just generalized tiredness, but a pervasive, debilitating state that was actively affecting her daily functioning, particularly her driving. She was talking about having near accidents. And most chillingly, she reported experiencing unsettling episodes of profound memory loss or unconsciousness while engaged in complex tasks. She was talking about actually driving and not actually remembering the path that she drove. These blackouts, if genuine, presented a compelling and exculpatory explanation for the accident. From the perspective of the state troopers conducting the investigation, particularly in the early stages when objective evidence of intentionality was absent, these reported medical issues, corroborated by a recent doctor's visit, provided a powerful and immediate answer. And as far as the state troopers conducting the investigation were concerned, that explained the crash. The conclusions in the reports were that it was some kind of medical condition They think she may have had a seizure that caused her to bear off the road and hit the tree. This narrative offers straightforward, albeit tragic, resolution to the immediate investigative questions. In other words, case closed. The medical and accident reports aligned. The coroner said it was an accident, and so did the accident report. The initial investigative phase, operating on available evidence and plausible medical explanations, thus categorized Charlie Billis's death as a heartbreaking, yet ultimately unintentional, accident. However, as is often the way with investigations that scratch beyond the surface, what appeared settled would soon unravel. But in the months ahead, investigators would have reason to question that rumor. The seemingly logical and comforting conclusion would eventually be challenged by a relentless pursuit of a different kind of truth. The passage of time can often dull the sharp edges of tragedy, but sometimes it only allows for deeper, more unsettling truths to surface. By January 2011, it had been more than a year since 43-year-old Christine Billis had smashed her car head on into a tree outside rural Brownington, Vermont. The initial shock had receded, replaced by a lingering quiet. Yet, beneath this veneer of rural calm, the early suspicions about the crash had not fully dissipated within the law enforcement community. Police were a little suspicious about the crash. Why did this car go off the road? These internal queries, born of anomaly and a lack of logical explanation, remained a quiet undercurrent in the official narrative. Christine, the central figure in this tragedy, had miraculously suffered only minor injuries, a fact that continued to stand in stark contrast to the fate of her husband. But her husband, 57-year-old Charlie Billis, had been killed in the crash. The distinction in their outcomes directly attributed to Charlie's lack of restraint. While she had her seat belt on, Charlie did not. And of course, he went into the windshield and died shortly after the crash. Provided a seemingly straightforward physical explanation for the differential injuries. Officially, the initial inquiry into the crash had been ruled an accident. The prevailing public consensus and the most charitable interpretation aligned with the medical theories. Everyone assumed that Christine either fell asleep or had a seizure or something. The details of her recent health challenges lent considerable weight to these assumptions. The day before the accident, Christine was actually at a sleep studies doctor's appointment, a seemingly corroborating detail that strongly supported the idea of an underlying medical vulnerability. However, beyond the official reports and the general public's assumptions, a subterranean river of doubt and animosity continued to flow. However, around NEK TV, the public access station where Charlie and Christine had both volunteered, rumors persisted. These rumors were not of the speculative, fleeting kind, but rather solidified into deeply held convictions among some who knew Charlie best. She killed my best friend. I knew that she did it, articulated with the raw certainty of perceived betrayal. The emotional climate among some of Charlie's circle was clearly charged, marked by a refusal to accept the official accident-based narrative. Despite these hard feelings, Christine, with an outward display of resilience, attempted to reclaim a semblance of normalcy. Despite hard feelings on the part of her fellow volunteers, Christine did her best to carry on as before. Her actions demonstrated an effort to resume her life, or at least its routines. In the wake of such a profound loss, after Charlie had been killed, she would show up at the studio and do some productions on her own, a continuation of the shared purpose she had found with Charlie, perhaps a way to honor his memory or, more pragmatically, to maintain a connection to a community that might offer support. As time continued its relentless march, so too did Christine's journey into a new phase of life. And more than a year after her husband's death, the 43-year-old also had a new man in her life, Kevin Leland. The introduction of a new partner is, for many widows, a sign of healing and moving forward. But Kevin Leland was not just any new acquaintance. Like Charlie, Kevin had a tangential connection to the world of media, though in a more contemporary, less traditional form. Like Charlie, Kevin worked on the fringes of the media world. He's a blogger. His chosen focus was particularly relevant to the events swirling around Christine. He loved blogging about crime stories online. This specific interest would, in retrospect, add a layer of calculated intent to his involvement. Their meeting, characteristic of the modern age, occurred online too in August of 2010. Their digital courtship blossomed on a dating site called OkCupid. Christine's profile, perhaps a carefully curated reflection of her online persona, immediately struck a chord with Kevin. Christine had a really good sense of humor and was easy to talk to, especially online. The anonymity and perceived safety of online interaction can often lead to a rapid exchange of deeply personal information, forging a bond that feels intimate even if built on a curated digital self. One of the primary and most significant pieces of information Christine disclosed early in their online acquaintance was, naturally, the circumstances of her past. One of the first things Christine shared after meeting Kevin was the fact that she'd lost her husband almost a year earlier. This disclosure set the stage for how she wanted her narrative to be understood. She presented herself as a victim of a cruel twist of fate, grappling with profound guilt and the enduring shadow of a tragic error. It was an accident that she blamed on herself. Her account to Kevin mirrored the early medical theory that had, at the time, closed the official police investigation. Christine said that she must have had a spell. She's a diabetic, and when she passed out behind the car veered off and hit the tree. This medical explanation provided a degree of self-exculpation, attributing the accident to an involuntary, physiological event beyond her conscious control. According to Kevin, her outward presentation was consistent with a person deeply affected by such a loss. And according to Kevin, she was still struggling to deal with the aftermath. She was depressed. She seemed devastated over the loss of her husband. Said that he was a good guy. These initial interactions painted a picture of a grieving widow, lonely and vulnerable, seeking connection and understanding after an unthinkable tragedy. Christine's profound loneliness, coupled with her apparent vulnerability, was precisely what had brought her to OkCupid and Kevin. They embarked on a relationship that began as a friendship, nurtured by open communication. They became friends. They talked on the phone. This initial, purely conversational phase then transitioned into real-world encounters, and eventually they met in person. These meetings apparently confirmed the online connection, fostering a growing intimacy. We shared a lot of laughs. They got to know each other pretty quickly, I think. However, beneath the surface of shared laughter and rapid connection, Kevin Leland sensed something more, a hint of deeper, untold stories. This intuition was fueled by a particular detail on Christine's online profile. However, according to Kevin, he and Christine had shared more than just laughs. Reading her profile, OkCupid asks you about, what secret would you be willing to reveal online? Christine's answer, in hindsight, held a chilling premonition of her true intentions. And she says, well, nothing now, but once I get to know you, I'll tell you a little something. It was a tantalizing breadcrumb, a promise of hidden depths, a self-awareness that she harbored secrets, waiting for the right level of trust to reveal them. And as their relationship deepened, as she evidently came to finally did trust Kevin enough to reveal her secret, Christine's little something would turn out to be huge. The casual intimacy of online dating was about to be profoundly corrupted by a dark confession. The revelation arrived with startling force on January 14th, 2011, when Kevin Leland placed a telephone call that would irrevocably alter the course of the investigation into Charlie Billis's death. The recipient of this call was Vincent Aluzzi, a figure of considerable standing in the Vermont community, an NEK TV volunteer, a Vermont state senator, and, crucially for this developing narrative, a county prosecutor. In the rough and tumble world of state politics and public service, you receive all kinds of calls from all kinds of people. The spectrum of these calls is vast, ranging from the genuinely significant to the utterly outlandish. Some are legitimate, some are crackpots, and some are somewhere in between. It was with this seasoned discernment that Aluzi approached the unexpected call from Kevin Leland. And when Kevin told Aluzi why he was calling, the state senator figured he was just one more crackpot. The initial message was indeed startling, challenging the officially accepted truth of an accident. I told him that I had information regarding the murder of his friend, Charles Ellis. Aluzi's immediate reaction was rooted in professional caution and personal disbelief. My initial reaction was highly skeptical, somewhat dismissive, because it came from someone I had never met, never spoken with, did not know. The burden of proof in such a grave accusation is immense, and a complete stranger claiming to possess knowledge of murder is often met with justifiable skepticism. However, Kevin Leland, perhaps sensing the skepticism in Aluzi's tone, asked Aluzi to hear him out, though recognizing the need to provide context and establish his bona fides. He patiently explained how he had come to know Christine through the dating website, recounting the story of their online connection and the burgeoning intimacy. The core of Kevin's credibility, as he sought to convey, lay in the depth of Christine's trust in him. She obviously fell for him. She trusted him. This developing emotional bond had served as a conduit, loosening the tight grip of her guarded secrets. So much so that over the last few months, she had opened up to him. The gradual nature of her disclosures underscored their apparent authenticity, a slow unveiling of a repressed truth. She began by admitting to the marital strains, a stark contrast to her earlier public persona. She indicated that she wasn't as happily married as she led me to believe she was at first. And then, building upon this foundation, confessed unhappiness. And that admission, according to Kevin, had eventually led Christine to reveal the secret she'd hinted at in her online profile. The moment of ultimate disclosure, imbued with emotional intensity, arrived with shattering force. She just broke down sobbing, just said that I did it on purpose. I drove the car into the tree on purpose. This was not merely a confession of culpability, but one accompanied by a detailed explanation of motive. Not only had Christine supposedly confessed to the act itself, Kevin claimed she'd told him why she'd done it. Her justification, chilling in its clarity, painted a picture of sustained suffering. She told me he was abusive to both her and her daughters. This claim, while deeply disturbing, provided a plausible, albeit shocking, explanation for an act of such extremity. Kevin further buttressed his narrative by recounting a chilling experience. Christine had allegedly even taken him out to the crash site and walked him through the so-called accident. This tour of the crime scene, presented by the perpetrator herself, was particularly unnerving, implying a chilling detachment. The manner of her recounting suggested a perturbing psychological state. She was talking about it almost with a sense of pride, like, "Look what I did." This detail hinted at a complex internal landscape, possibly a mixture of distorted pride in her perceived escape and a twisted sense of accomplishment. Vincent Aluzi, a seasoned prosecutor, understood the gravity of Kevin's allegations. This was an incredible story if it was true. However, he also knew that incredible stories alone do not secure convictions. In the cold, rational light of the legal system, I said, "Mr. Leland, I'm a prosecutor, and in the criminal justice system, you need proof." The imperative for tangible, admissible evidence was paramount, and to Aluzi's profound surprise, proof that Kevin Leland claimed to have. Kevin's immediate and confident response instantly transformed his status from a potential crackpot to a crucial informant. His response was unequivocal. His response was, "I have tape recordings. I recorded her confessing." This shift in the narrative, from hearsay to concrete evidence, galvanized Aluzi. The immediate instruction was clear. conveying the urgency and criticality of this unexpected development. I immediately told him to secure the tapes in a safe location, and I would have someone from the Vermont State Police get in touch with him. A seemingly closed case was about to be dramatically reopened, thrust into the unforgiving light of a murder investigation. The momentum generated by Kevin Leland's revelations accelerated swiftly. On January 21st, Kevin Leland officially met with an investigator from Vermont State Police. The stakes were high as he presented his evidence directly to the authorities. During this crucial meeting, Kevin played the tape he'd made of Christine's supposed confession. The investigator's reaction was notably calm, suggesting that Kevin's shocking claims were not entirely novel to law enforcement. He didn't seem shocked at all, and he indicated to me that they actually did have some suspicion, but nothing that they could act on. This acknowledgement was critical. It confirmed that Kevin was not simply an overzealous amateur, but rather a key piece in a puzzle the police had long recognized but couldn't solve. Their initial suspicions, born of the anomalous crash scene data and the persistent rumors from the NEK-TV community, had finally found a potential avenue for corroboration. But Kevin's tape changed all that. The recording provided the crucial lever, the tangible lead needed to move beyond suspicion and into active, official investigation. That's enough evidence for them then to go get a warrant. However, this initial warrant was not an arrest warrant, a critical legal distinction. It was rather a more strategic instrument. Instead, it authorized the investigators to use Kevin as a confidential informant to record more conversations with Christine. The initial recording, while undeniably powerful in convincing the police, had a significant legal flaw for direct use in court. That first recording wasn't usable, it wasn't admissible, because I didn't get under a warrant. The sanctity of legal process, particularly concerning recorded conversations that delve into potentially criminal activity, demands strict adherence to warrant procedures to ensure the evidence's integrity and admissibility. Thus, the decision was made to leverage Kevin's unique position, turning a civilian acquaintance into a confidential operative. The second legally sanctioned recording was orchestrated for February 13th, 2011. On this date, Kevin met with Christine and secretly recorded their conversation. The recording equipment itself was rudimentary, highlighting the resourceful, albeit amateur, nature of Kevin's involvement. In this particular case, the state police relied on Mr. Leland to use his own digital recorder. I kept it in my pocket. It was crude, but it worked. Despite the simplicity of the technology, the content captured was undeniably explosive. On the tape, Christine once again admitted to crashing the car on purpose. Her repeated confession solidified the core accusation. She articulated her motivations in terms of self-preservation and protecting her family. I was protecting myself and my kids. That's what I was doing. She elaborated on her justification, asserting that she claimed Charlie had mentally abused her for years and that she just couldn't take it anymore. This narrative of sustained psychological torment presented itself as the driving force behind her drastic action. I knew that was the only way, she claimed, depicting the murder as a desperate act born of perceived necessity, a tragic solution to an unbearable domestic situation. Christine's narrative continued to weave a complex tale of impulse and despair. Although, according to Christine, the crash wasn't exactly premeditated. This distinction between a cold, calculated plan and a sudden, desperate act could be legally significant. She described the act as an impulsive outburst during a marital dispute. She claimed that she and Charlie had been arguing on the drive home when she saw the tree up ahead. She just snapped and decided it's time. The description of her emotional state immediately prior to impact was particularly vivid and disturbing. Christine said that when she saw that tree coming at her, it was one of the most beautiful things she'd ever seen. This macabre appreciation of the approaching instrument of death spoke to a profound level of despair, a mental state far removed from normal. And according to Christine, her intent went beyond mere murder. It encompassed her own demise. According to Christine, it was supposed to be the last thing she ever saw, too. She asserted to Kevin, with an unsettling candor, "Kevin, seriously, with all my true heart, I tell you this. When I hit that tree, I was expecting to be dead." Her narrative presented the incident as a tragic, desperate murder-suicide, a final, ultimate escape from a perceived torment. That's how bad it was, that I was fine with dying. I knew that if God said I would have to die, too, that he was going to take care of my kids. I'm not worried about it. This religious justification for such a violent act hinted at a deep internal struggle and a distortion of faith to rationalize her desperate actions. That's what Christine said on the tape. However, law enforcement operates on more than just a confessional tape. The corroboration of such a critical component of her confession, the abuse claims, was absolutely paramount. But would anyone else back up her abuse claims? Over the next few weeks, the state police investigators started looking into it. This meant a meticulous and sensitive investigation, interviewing friends, family, and community members, delving into the private life of the Billis household. You have witnesses that were saying that the two were always at each other, which certainly corroborated the existence of marital friction and arguments, as the NEK-TV volunteers had initially reported. Crucially, however, the inquiries consistently failed to unearth any evidence whatsoever of the escalating, physically threatening abuse Christine claimed. However, no one claimed that their bickering had ever crossed a line into the realm of violence or explicit threats. Those who knew Charlie intimately dismissed the very notion of him being a physically abusive person. The guy didn't have an abusive bone in his body. Others who had observed their relationship closely concurred, stating unequivocally, "I'd never seen him be abusive to her at all, either physically or psychologically." While every couple is going to have their moments, as one friend wisely noted, the crucial distinction was that they've never laid a hand on each other. This consistent lack of corroboration for her claims of physical and even severe mental abuse, particularly claims of direct threats to kill her, began to cast a long shadow of doubt over Christine's entire narrative. Her primary justification for her desperate act, as captured on tape, was slowly but systematically being dismantled by the diligent efforts of the investigators. The police now had compelling evidence of her confession, but her reasons for doing so were becoming increasingly suspect. With Christine's claims of spousal abuse failing to find any independent corroboration, and indeed being directly contradicted by those who knew the couple, the state police investigators grew increasingly skeptical about Christine's abuse claims. The time for indirect information gathering and undercover recordings was drawing to a close. It was time for a direct confrontation. The investigators decided it was time to confront her directly. On April 25th, they made an unannounced visit to her house to ask a few questions. Christine, unaware of the full scope of their investigation and completely oblivious to Kevin Leland's role as a confidential informant, initially misinterpreted the purpose of their visit. She assumed it had something to do with her insurance claim, a matter that had been outstanding since the crash. The insurance company said that they had to go to the court in order to be able to pay the claim. She explained, signaling frustration and impatience she felt regarding the delayed payout. The investigators, perhaps seeking to disarm her and allow her to speak freely, initially entertained this misconception, allowing her to elaborate on her financial concerns. The insurance in question was not merely a peripheral detail, but a significant financial motivation, now being subtly foreground. "Is this life insurance or auto insurance?" one investigator queried, subtly probing for information while appearing to confirm her understanding. "Auto insurance, $100,000, she promptly replied, providing a concrete figure. This was, as the investigation was learning, a big chunk of insurance money, and Christine's eagerness to access these funds was palpable. Money that Christine appeared anxious to collect. She expressed her frustration with the protracted process. "We've been going over this since the car crash. Yeah, and now it's April 11. What the heck?" Her focus on the financial remuneration for the accident that killed her husband, framed by impatience, provided an unsettling contrast of pure, uncomplicated grief. Then, with her guard likely lowered by the discussion of the insurance claim, the investigators executed their pivot, stripping away the pretense and revealing the true, devastating purpose of their visit. But then, after allowing Christine to go on at length about her insurance troubles, the investigators told her the truth. The shift in tone and topic would have been immediate and chilling. "To be honest with you, I don't know what's going on with your insurance claim, nor have I spoken with your insurance adjuster or anything." "Right." The air must have thickened with unspoken tension as the investigator then delivered the direct, undeniable question, confronting her with the essence of their months-long investigation. Then the investigator came right out and told Christine why he was there. "Have you ever told anyone that you intentionally crashed your car to kill your husband?" Put directly on the spot, Christine's initial reaction was one of complete and utter denial. Put on the spot, Christine didn't so much as blink. No, her composure, in that immediate moment, was remarkable, almost unnerving, suggesting a practiced ability to dissemble or a profound state of self-preservation. The investigator pressed further, offering another potential narrative for a deliberate act. Drawing on her earlier recorded confession, "Have you ever told anyone you intentionally crashed your car to kill yourself?" Again, the immediate, firm denial. "No." "Okay. Are you sure?" "Yes." "Okay." This unwavering insistence on innocence, however, was about to be profoundly challenged. The investigator then brought the full weight of their intelligence to bear, dismantling her denial with incontrovertible proof. "Because I've listened to hours of phone calls." This statement would have been a gut punch, an immediate recognition that her private world had been thoroughly penetrated. Christine's subsequent claim that he led her to believe that they tapped her phone and her computer, and that's how they knew the information, while plausible in terms of her perception, highlights the psychological impact of being confronted with secret recordings. The investigators had, through Kevin Leland, not merely tapped her phones in the conventional sense, but had strategically positioned an informant to capture her most intimate confessions. And the investigators made it clear that they knew it all. They then articulated specific details from her taped confessions, undeniable fragments of conversations that could only have come from her own lips. "I heard you talk about at one point how you crashed a car, and you didn't care whether you lived or died. You were going to let God decide the outcome. This is the stuff I've heard you say to other people." This precise recall of her private words left no room for equivocation or continued denial, having revealed the extensive depth of their knowledge, providing incontrovertible evidence that her private conversations were anything but private. The investigators offered Christine one final opportunity to confess, to unburden herself. Then, once letting her know just how much they had on her, the investigators offered Christine one more chance. "Do you have anything else you want to say?" Yet, even with the weight of the evidence crashing down around her, Christine maintained a stubborn silence, a final desperate attempt to control the narrative by refusing to engage. Not at this moment. This defiant silence, however, quickly cracked once the immediate pressure of the investigators' presence was removed. Christine didn't have anything else to say to the investigators, but once they wrapped up their questions and left, she quickly got in touch with Kevin, unaware that he was cooperating with the state police. In this critical moment of perceived vulnerability and impending doom, she reached out to the very individual who had served as a conduit for her downfall, seeking solace and counsel from the unsuspecting betrayer. Her desperate words, captured once again, succinctly encapsulated her profound realization. She tells Kevin, quote, "I'm busted." The weight of inevitable consequence crashed upon her. She thought she was going to jail. Despite the stark realization and the accumulation of damning evidence. She wouldn't be going right away, though. The legal process, particularly in murder investigations, demands methodical and precise action. Instead, the investigators let her stew for several weeks while they got their case in order. This strategic delay was deliberate, allowing for meticulous organization of evidence, the finalization of reports, and the psychological impact of a period of anxious waiting to weigh heavily on Christine. This period also served to confirm their case beyond any reasonable doubt, ensuring all potential defense arguments were anticipated and addressed. And by the beginning of June, she'd had enough. The psychological pressure of waiting for the inevitable, coupled with a profound sense of being discovered, proved too great. On June 6th, Christine Billis, her defenses irrevocably eroded, made a decisive move. She contacted the investigators and requested they come back so she could give them a second, very different statement. This call marked the end of her pretense, a full capitulation to the evidence they possessed. When they returned, she shed the layers of denial and evasion, admitting outright, "So I wasn't exactly truthful last time." This candid confession was a monumental breakthrough for the prosecution, as she confessed outright. She not only definitively admitted that she had purposefully killed Charlie, but she also revisited her earlier narrative of desperation, now with an amplified urgency, attempting to contextualize her heinous act as a final resort. She claimed that she'd had no choice. In this second, more complete confession, Christine intensified her earlier claims of abuse, framing Charlie as a truly terrifying figure. Christine claimed that he was threatening physical abuse as well, that he threatened to kill her. This elevated the alleged abuse from mental torment to overt, life-threatening aggression, presenting a far more compelling justification for her actions. "I just couldn't take it anymore," she reiterated, reinforcing the narrative of a woman pushed to her absolute limit. She painted a picture of such profound despair that she welcomed death. She would rather not live and continue in this life. "I thought we were both going to die." This insistence on a murder-suicide scenario continued to be a central pillar of her explanation, serving both as a supposed justification for killing Charlie and a means to mitigate the chilling aspect of her own survival. And indeed, she confirmed that in the immediate aftermath of the crash, her initial reaction to finding herself alive was profound disappointment, and she claimed that she had initially been disappointed when she didn't die in the crash. "I remember thinking, can I do anything right?" This grim self-reproach spoke to a deeply fractured psyche, or perhaps a cunning manipulation of psychological expectation. However, once she realized the undeniable truth of Charlie's absence, a different emotion, one of chilling relief, began to manifest itself. But then, once she realized that Charlie was gone, Christine admitted that she felt relieved. Her poignant, disturbing confession captured the heart of this relief, a liberation from perceived suffering. At the hospital, "I didn't hear him yelling at me." These words, chilling in their raw honesty, confirmed the depth of her perceived marital misery and provided the prosecution with a profound insight into her underlying motivation, even if the validity of the abuse itself remained unsubstantiated. The truth, in all its stark brutality, was now on the table, articulated by the perpetrator herself. On June 6, 2011, almost 2 full years had elapsed since Charlie Billis tragically perished in a bizarre and perplexing car crash outside the sleepy rural village of Brownington, Vermont. The passage of these months and years had been anything but quiet for investigators. Rather, it had been a painstaking accumulation of fragmented clues and hushed suspicions, slowly congealing into a damning narrative. The precise moments of the crash were now re-examined with a horrifying clarity. Charles and Christine headed home on Route 5A toward Brownington, and Christine veered into a tree and struck it. The initial bafflement surrounding the impact intensified under the new light of her confession. Police were a little suspicious about the crash because she went straight into the tree, without skin marks. There was no intent to stop. This anomaly, once perplexing detail, now screamed a deliberate action. And on that very afternoon, Christine Billis had irrevocably confirmed what the state police and many of Charlie's friends had long suspected, that she had driven into a tree on purpose. In her second, more complete confession, Christine offered her explanation for this premeditated act of vehicular violence. To the direct question of, what was your intent at hitting that tree? Her response was chillingly explicit, reinforcing her earlier taped assertions to Kevin. I thought we were both going to die. That was what I thought was going to happen. The consistent narrative she presented was that Christine has tried to convince people that it was going to be a murder-suicide. This claim, it believed, painted her as a woman in such profound despair that she was willing to end her own life along with her husband's, potentially eliciting a degree of tragic sympathy or, at the very least, a nuanced understanding of her motivations. However, the state police, armed with their broader investigation and a deeper understanding of Christine's strategic thought process, harbored significant doubts about the sincerity of her alleged suicidal intent. Their skepticism was rooted in a critical detail from earlier in the investigation, Steve Merrill's story. However, the state police had reason to doubt her. She basically picked someone's brain who had crashed a truck purposely. Steve's detailed recounting of an insurance fraud scheme a month before the crash became a linchpin of the prosecution's counter-narrative. The specific how-to shared by Steve was particularly damning. How the driver had belted himself in, padded themselves with pillows and a full-face motorcycle helmet. Steve's visceral realization, as soon as I told that story, it's like I could see the gears going in Christine's brain, now seemed to find terrifying confirmation in Christine's survival and Charlie's demise. The glaring absence of any protective measures for herself at the time of the collision, combined with her survival, starkly contradicted her murder-suicide claims. There was no evidence Christine had taken those extra precautions, indicating that while Charlie was left unbelted and vulnerable, Christine had, by wearing her seatbelt and experiencing only minor injuries on her less damaged side of the vehicle, afforded herself a considerable degree of protection. Furthermore, the foundation of Christine's professed desperation, her repeated claims of Charlie's physical and mental abuse, had completely collapsed under scrutiny. But there was also no evidence to support her claim that Charlie had been abusive. Those closest to Charlie, his friends and family, unequivocally dismissed the very notion of him being a violent or even psychologically coercive individual. The guy didn't have an abusive bone in his body. Others who had observed the couple extensively corroborated this, asserting, I'd never seen him be abusive to her at all, either physically or psychologically. The absence of any corroborating witness, any recorded incident, or any demonstrable pattern of abuse rendered Christine's defense null and void. Her explanation, while emotionally resonant, lacked any factual basis in the cold light of police investigation. Instead, the state police believed they had definitively uncovered Christine's real motive for wanting Charlie dead, a motive far more mundane, yet tragically compelling than desperate abuse. It was a motive she had inadvertently hinted at in her first interview with the police when discussing her insurance claims. Well, the insurance company said that they had to go through the court in order to be able to pay the claim, and the amount involved was not trivial. And her $100,000 auto insurance claim wasn't the only payout either. Beyond the car insurance, Charlie's death triggered another, even more substantial, financial windfall for his family. Her children were the beneficiary of life insurance policy. It was a $300,000 insurance policy. This considerable sum, for $100,000 combined from auto and life insurance, presented an undeniable and powerful financial incentive. There's the motive right there. but the financial benefits extended beyond direct insurance payouts. Her husband's death had also entitled her to collect survivor benefits from Social Security. This provided a steady, guaranteed income stream, addressing the strapped-for cash reality the family had been experiencing. I think that she wanted to be free of him and get a check in the mail every month, a cynical yet plausible interpretation of her deeper desires. And there was one more often overlooked benefit that spoke to the mundane, yet emotionally charged aspects of domestic life when considering the dissolution of a marriage. And then there were the kids to think about, too. If Christine had pursued a divorce, a contentious and financially draining process, she would have faced any kind of a divorce where her kids might be under his custody. Charlie, despite his legal blindness, had been a loving and involved father figure to her daughters. His death neatly sidestepped no messy custody dispute, ensuring full parental control for Christine and alleviating a potential future legal battle that could have been both costly and emotionally taxing. The convergence of a meticulously planned act, drawing from Steve Merrill's story. The systematic debunking of her abuse claims, the clear financial incentives, and a direct, albeit rationalized, confession led law enforcement to an unambiguous conclusion. No messy custody dispute, a cash payout, and a confession. As far as the police and prosecutors were concerned, it all added up to one thing. They had a case of premeditated murder. The evidence, patiently gathered and carefully analyzed, presented a formidable argument. There seemed to be mountains of evidence. However, despite the apparent strength and volume of this evidence, the state police didn't arrest Christine just yet. There was a deliberate and calculated pause in the investigative process. Instead, after getting her confession on tape, they left. The instruction given to her, with an almost chilling courtesy, was revealing of their strategy. He gave her, a few days to get her affairs in audit. This wasn't merely a gesture of magnanimity, but a psychological maneuver, allowing Christine to sit with the weight of her confession and the imminent prospect of arrest. The full gravity of her situation would undoubtedly bear down on her, potentially softening her resistance and making the eventual arrest smoother. But there was not the only reason they'd held off on making an arrest, though, because even with what appeared to be an overwhelming body of proof, for all their evidence, there were still some potential holes in the prosecution's case. Legal proceedings, particularly those involving such serious charges, are rarely straightforward. One significant area of vulnerability lay in the complex medical context surrounding Christine prior to the crash, specifically the medication she'd been taking prior to crash, a drug called Chantix. While a smoking cessation aid, people take Chantix to quit smoking. Its adverse effects have become a growing concern in the medical and legal communities. However, since the crash, the drug had been at the center of a number of lawsuits alleging some potentially serious side effects, including some that could work to the defense's advantage. The catalog of these potential side effects was indeed alarming and directly relevant to her psychological state and capacity for intent. Some of the adverse effects are psychosis, hallucination, paranoia, delusion, homicidal ideation, aggression, anxiety, and panic, as well as suicidal ideation. The critical detail here was that all of these are on the black box warnings, indicating a high-level concern from regulatory bodies like the FDA. A skilled defense attorney could argue that Christine's capacity for premeditation, or even rational thought, was severely compromised by the drug's influence, suggesting a diminished responsibility for her actions, framing the incident not as cold-blooded murder, but as a tragic, drug-induced psychotic break or impulse. And Chantix was not the only pharmaceutical player in this complex scenario. And that wasn't the only medication Christine had been taking at the time of the crash. She'd also been taking a prescription sleep aid, Ambien. The cumulative effect of these medications was also a potential vulnerability for the prosecution. The regulatory landscape around Ambien itself had also shifted significantly, underscoring its potent effects. The FDA actually held that the dosage that Christine was taking was a harmful dose that it was, causing drowsy driving, and they ordered that any future prescriptions for that medication be cut in half immediately. This admission from a powerful regulatory body could be a game changer. It opened the door for a defense argument that her ability to drive safely, let alone form homicidal intent, was impaired by a legally prescribed medication, prescribed at a dosage later deemed harmful. In addition to the thorny issues presented by Christine's multi-drug regimen and their potential side effects, the prosecution faced reservations regarding the very person who had served as their invaluable, albeit unconventional, instrument for securing Christine's confession, a blogger and self-styled social media reporter named Kevin Leland. Kevin's personal ambitions, while useful for the investigation, presented a potential credibility issue in court. Kevin refers to this as his big scoop. He was definitely after fame. A defense attorney would undoubtedly seize upon this, painting Kevin as an opportunist, hungry for notoriety, who might have exaggerated or even manipulated Christine's statements to further his own career. Was it possible he preyed on Christine? The defense would likely suggest, appealing to the jury's sympathy for a vulnerable individual. It's clear he manipulated her, and she was in a very fragile state. Her extensive mental health records would be paraded as evidence of this fragility. All of the mental health records show that she felt responsible for her husband's death, a psychological state that could have made her susceptible to manipulation. While Kevin denied manipulating Christine, arguing his motives were rooted in a genuine desire for justice, the methodological issues surrounding his initial recordings created additional vulnerabilities. But there were also questions about the tapes he had made of his conversations with her. I've never seen an instance where the police rely on an informant to provide the recording device. The reliance on Kevin's personal